and a 2-ton bomb load. Revolutionary in design, it was the fastest of its time and built almost entirely out of wood. It took the fight to the enemy's door and swept across Europe. The Mosquito, a legend in its own lifetime. Next on Modern Marvels.
The best aircraft are often the fastest. The pursuit of speed has been part of the appeal of aviation from its earliest days. And often it is the most innovative and radical designs that break speed records. The Lockheed Blackbird uses new metals that came out of the space race and flies at over 3 times the speed of sound. Throughout the 1930s, one company in Britain was also obsessed with speed, and it was one man's dream to use a radical material to build the fastest aircraft in the world. The material was wood, and his name was Geoffrey de Havilland.
He was so very determined. Anything he wanted to do, he got on with it and did it. A real leader of people, not by driving them, but leading them from the front.
As early as the 1930s, de Havilland knew that lightweight wooden aircraft were the key to greater speeds. In 1934, his twin-engine Comet won the London to Melbourne, Australia air race. With speeds of over 200 miles per hour, the aircraft flew halfway around the world in just 77 hours. A ship would take 4 weeks. From his experience building the Comet, de Havilland visualized building a super-fast, high-precision bomber. De Havilland was convinced that with the rise of the German Luftwaffe in the mid-1930s and the terror they inflicted during the Spanish Civil War, Britain would soon need all the heavy-duty air power it could produce.
It took the British quite a while to realize that the Germans had innovative designs, monoplane fighters, but more importantly, they had medium bombers that were being developed, and they had, in effect, tested them in the Spanish Civil War from 1936 onwards. It's a huge wake-up call.
At the time, the British Air Ministry believed that the future of bombing lay in huge, heavily armed conventional bombers, such as the Lancaster and Halifax. Radical new designs of lightweight aircraft were ignored. But Geoffrey de Havilland was not deterred and continued working on designs for his new bomber. His goal was to construct a cheap, easy-to-build aircraft powered by 2 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines. It would have no guns, no armor plating, could carry up to 4,000 pounds of explosive, and reach a speed of nearly 400 miles per hour, faster than any other aircraft in the world. But the most amazing concept was to build a warplane made entirely of wood. The aerodynamicists and the military men at that time ridiculed the idea, asking, how can you build a modern bomber out of wood? How would it carry bombs? And how would it protect itself? But de Havilland was prepared to answer. It wouldn't need to protect itself. Its defense would be speed. As for strength, pound for pound, timber has similar structural properties as aluminum and steel.
There's a shortage in Britain in the late 1930s of metal workers, of people skilled in the new technologies of fighter airplanes, of bomber airplanes. What you did have, though, was a nation of cabinet builders, of woodworkers, of individual small craftsmen. But more importantly, you can actually mobilize all of these people to build it, and you can make it, in effect, a cottage industry.
September 1939, with war breaking out in Europe, de Havilland is at last given the green light to build a prototype aircraft. Immediately, the de Havilland design team goes into overdrive. Led by Ronald Bishop, they move into a 17th century manor house called Salisbury Hall. This remote house was chosen to keep the new aircraft away from prying enemy eyes. By October 1939, work begins by building a mock-up aircraft in the manor's enormous kitchen. A hangar disguised as a barn is constructed at the western side of the moat.
We were working often periods of time, 6.5 days a week, and at some periods from 7 o'clock in the morning till 7 o'clock at night.
But they are racing against the clock. In the spring of 1940, Germany conquers France, and the British Army is swept off the beaches of Dunkirk. The Germans are poised for an invasion of Britain. Every effort is focused on holding off the Germans, and de Havilland's wonder plane seems destined to never leave the drawing board.
Air Marshal Sir Wilfrid Freeman was the only member of RAF High Command to support the Mosquito. As a result, the project was initially known as Freeman's Folly. Modern marvels will return in a moment.
June 1940, the German army has advanced to the shores of the English Channel and is getting ready to invade Britain. In just 6 months, the Nazis have conquered Poland, Norway, Denmark, Belgium, and France. Britain is the only country left to face the onslaught of Nazi Germany. With Britain fighting for its life, priority is given to production of existing types of combat aircraft. Geoffrey de Havilland's radical new wooden bomber looks condemned to be scrapped. But de Havilland is not a man to take no for an answer.
Sir Geoffrey's words are, well, they may not want it now, but they will want it.
De Havilland persuades the Air Ministry to let him continue as long as he does not use any of the vital materials required for the war effort. Throughout the summer of 1940, as Britain fights for its life against the German Luftwaffe in the Battle of Britain, de Havilland and his team work on the wooden bomber. Finally, in December 1940, the aircraft is ready to be shown to the men from the ministry. It is called the Mosquito. De Havilland has done the impossible. Using scraps from the British military machine, he created the fastest aircraft in the world.
We knew it would fly. We were absolutely confident it would. And the question is, how much better than the Spitfire it would be? Of course, we said it would be. And it was. 20 miles an hour faster.
The Air Ministry is so impressed with its performance that they place an order for 150 Mosquitoes. It is an amazing contract for an untried and untested aircraft.
It's one worse than an impossible task. It's a wonderful thing to change from, they don't want it, and so give us more and more.
But de Havilland's vision of construction answers the call, enabling the Mosquito to be built in vast numbers. A plan that is as simple in practice as it is visionary in conception. The aircraft would be built like a model plane, with wood, plywood, glue, and screws. Over 400 companies around Britain with wood craftsmen would make the various sections. The fuselage would be built in 2 halves before being bonded together. The wing would be assembled in one piece and then transported to the main factory for the final assembly. In all, over 6 tons of wood and nearly 50,000 brass screws are used in each aircraft. At 40 feet long, with a wingspan of 54 feet, a legend is born. With a speed of 400 miles per hour, faster than any aircraft in the world, the Mosquito is ready to do battle. The RAF views this plane as too valuable to let just anybody fly it. Only the most experienced crews are selected. But for many of these men, the Mosquito, powered by its 2 mighty Merlin engines, is unlike anything they had ever flown before.
The purr of a Merlin is something to experience. It really is. And then we taxied out and took off.
There you were. You suddenly look at the altimeter. 1 minute you're down at 1,000 feet. Next minute you're up at 30,000.
She would climb at 2,500 feet a minute, and that was really going some. You had to get into a jet to fly anything faster than that. If you started to mishandle her, pushing and pulling, in no time at all you would over control, and she would be like a mosquito. She would sting you.
In July 1941, the first Mosquitoes to go into service are delivered as photo reconnaissance units. It has taken just 22 months from the first drawings to delivery. Unarmed, bristling with up to 5 cameras, these aircraft are soon sweeping all over Europe, evading anti-aircraft guns and German fighters. The Germans have nowhere to hide. Nothing is safe from the Mosquito's prying eyes.
Photo reconnaissance was vital. We're talking the days before satellites, the days when human intelligence on the ground was limited. It was difficult to get back good information. Before every single bomber command raid over enemy targets, they had to take pictures of the targets, and in fact had to report the weather as well. So the Mosquito was an ideal airplane for that. In fact, you could say probably it was the best aircraft for this.
But it is as a bomber that the Mosquito comes into its own. During the early part of World War II, bombing was a case of hit or miss. Aircraft flying at 16,000 feet would drop their bombs in huge numbers, relying on luck, weather, and flying skill to hit their targets. But in 1942, the Mosquito bomber version changes all that. Relying solely on speed and height to outrun the enemy fighters, Mosquitoes can drop their bombs with pinpoint accuracy. Soon, Mosquitoes with their payload of 4,000 pounds are an integral part of bombing missions. But the Mosquito is even more deadly once the pilots perfect the art of fast, low-level daylight raids.
We had to be under 50 feet to be under the radar. That's the whole point of low-level operations, so the Germans don't know you're coming. And then, of course, you had to go low over the target as possible, so that you took them hopefully by surprise.
Some daylight raids were flown at such low altitudes that Mosquitoes would often come back with strange souvenirs from their mission.
Many of Aussie pilots come back with telephone wires draped around his tail wheel. I know I've come back with branches of trees that weren't planted in England.
Mosquito squadrons were now becoming more and more daring in their attacks, none more so than the daylight raid against the Dutch Philips radio factory in Eindhoven. Intelligence discovered that the Germans were using this factory for research into radar countermeasures. It must be destroyed. December 6, 1942, 10 Mosquitoes go for their target.
We went low level down the Scheldt estuary into Holland. And then just then we were approaching a place I called Turnhout. And at that point we had to climb up to 1,000 feet. And then we turned to port, and up came the factory and went down in a screening dive and dropped our bombs straight into it.
Racing for home, the Mosquitoes are caught in German anti-aircraft fire, or flak. Over the North Sea, disaster strikes.
The chap who decided to follow me, because he was on his first trip and he thought he'd follow an experienced pilot, and I'm afraid he caught a bit of flak because my cameraman suddenly called out, looking backwards, God, he's gone into the sea. I turned around and went back to sea, and there was no dinghy or anything, just a cauldron of boiling water.
Just 6 weeks later, on January 30th, 1943, the Mosquitoes go on another audacious raid on the 10th anniversary of Hitler's coming to power. Intelligence learns that there is to be a major Nazi rally in Berlin, led by Reich propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels and Reich Marshal Hermann Goering. It will be broadcast on German radio. The opportunity is too good to miss. The goal is not to hit the rally, but to create chaos and interrupt the broadcast. 3 Mosquitoes hit Berlin at 11 a.m., interrupting Goering's broadcast. At 4 p.m., a second group hits, interrupting Goebbels. For the Allies, it is a major propaganda success.
The Mosquito delivered to the Allies, particularly to the British, propaganda coups right the way through its service history, and all done by a small wooden aeroplane that the Germans had written off in their propaganda as being some sort of antique.
Later, Goering is heard to say, "It makes me furious when I see the Mosquito. I turn green and yellow with envy. The British knock together a beautiful wooden aircraft that every piano factory over there is building. They give it a speed, which they have increased again." But if the Mosquitoes were spoiling Goering's day, the Allies know that to spoil the Nazis' day, the Mosquitoes are going to have to bomb Berlin again and again until they smash it into submission.
In an era of metal planes, the Mosquito excelled in so many different combat roles that it was nicknamed the Wooden Wonder. Modern marvels will return in a moment.
Since entering service, the Wooden Mosquito has been thrown into battle with devastating results. Whatever role it is asked to do, the Mosquito answers the challenge, always ready to take the fight to Hitler's doorstep. By mid-1943, the Mosquito is bombing Berlin on such a regular basis that the missions are referred to as the Berlin Express. But for the Mosquito crews, nothing is ever just a routine mission.
We would take off after the Lancasters, perhaps 2 hours after the Lancasters had gone. And it was at that time that I really felt lonely.
It was a very lonely feeling. And it was at that point that you could start thinking about what you were doing. You had to rely entirely on the navigator who had radar aids and things like that. But then with the night closing in on you suddenly began to realise that you'd left your homeland behind and you were heading for you knew not what.
After 2 hours, the much faster Mosquitoes catch up with the slow lumbering Lancasters heading for Germany. Flying at 25,000 feet, the Mosquito crews look down on the procession of bombers 7,000 feet below them.
And then you would probably be treated to a sight you would rather not see, which was the German night fighter force intercepting the Lancasters. I mean, it's true to say that once the German night fighters found the bomber stream, they didn't let go. And they'd be there, hammering away at the flanks of the heavies, and you'd see a sheet of flame as a Lanc caught fire and then blew up. And this would be the melancholy procession to the target and out of it too. It's just awful.
But it is not only the night fighters that they have to get past. The German searchlights also hunt for any Allied aircraft in the sky.
The favorite thing for them to do was to pick up somebody with a searchlight and then fasten all other searchlights onto it. So it was like a moth in a candle flame, and it wasn't very long before you saw brr, 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 one-way tracer going, and then an explosion as a Lanc or a Halifax went down.
Suddenly, the most frightful glare suddenly hit the cockpit, and this blinding light, and I realized what it was, but at the same time, this bloody tracer came shooting past. So I just dived and twisted, and I got out of it.
You could twist and turn if you wanted to, but generally speaking, they would hold you as you twisted and turned, follow you. The way to get out was in a dive, so you could do a screaming dive and quickly fly away.
Eventually, the Mosquitoes and Lancasters reach their target. Having dropped their bombs and taken photos, they then have to fly back through the searchlights before they reach Britain. For the crews that make it back, the RAF finds a way of protecting them from the horrors of war.
People came back shot up. And one thing I did notice about the bomber airfields, of course, no one was ever sick. You never saw an injured man around the place. If people arrived wounded, he'd be quickly spirited away. Everybody next day was there, booted and spurred and smiling. Nobody was dead, or if they were dead, they weren't there anyway.
One squadron flew nearly 200 missions within a year, and Mosquitoes bombed Berlin 220 nights in a row. By early 1943, a bigger, badder version of the Mosquito comes into service, the fighter and night fighter Mosquito. Now armed with 4 .303 caliber machine guns, it can lay down a devastating storm of shells. During early trials, it was found that the flash of the guns was so intense that it momentarily blinded the crews. Modifications were made, and because of the grouping of the guns in the nose, Mosquito pilots now have a terrific concentration of massive firepower. Soon these first night fighters are in action, and with their new radar guidance systems are wreaking havoc on German bombers. The timing couldn't be better. In June 1944, a new devastating weapon hits Britain. After D-Day, as Allies were fighting to gain a foothold in Europe, Hitler unleashes his new terror weapon, the V-1 flying bomb. Flying at nearly 400 miles per hour, equal to the Mosquito's speed, and packed with high explosive, the V-1s are aimed at London. Once they've exhausted their fuel, they crash down on an unsuspecting target. Destroying these fast-flying bombs was a dangerous task. Quickly, Mosquito pilots devised ways to take these terror weapons out of the sky.
They would try and get some height and then swoop down on it and shoot it with cannon.
But obliterating a terror weapon could be life-threatening in more ways than one, as one pilot found out.
And heat squirted at it with his cannon, but he was a bit too close and it flew to bits. And a bit of it came in through the front and pierced the dinghy But he was sitting on it, inflated in the cockpit. So up he came off his seat and up towards the roof. But he was very fortunate. He always carried a dagger down his boot. I don't know if he wanted to fight his way out of Germany, perhaps. He produced the dagger, stabbed the dinghy, and down it went, and he got home. When I heard the story, I was absolutely terrified, and I always carried a knife down my own boot after that, just in case.
While the fighters were attacking the V-1s in the air, their photo recon brothers are scouring France and Belgium, hunting down their launch sites.
As we got near the target, of course, the navigator would alert you to your position. Put your nose down onto the towards the ramp and the pillbox, and the pilot would release the bombs. We did, I think, over 3,000 sorties against them, and in the end, Hitler only launched 5,000 of them. And it was an ideal target for the Mosquito. The Mosquito was made for V-1 sites.
After just 9 weeks, the Mosquitoes have destroyed over 650 of these terror weapons. But the Nazis are not beaten and are fighting as ferociously as ever. Once again, the Mosquito will go into harm's way on one of the most daring and ingenious raids of World War II.
During World War II, the Mosquito was produced in England, Canada, and Australia. The versatile aircraft served in Europe, the Middle and Far East, and on the Russian front. Modern marvels will return in a moment.
By 1944, the Mosquito, affectionately known by everybody as the Mossie, has become the RAF's favorite aircraft. As a supreme bomber, fighter, and reconnaissance aircraft, it is used in almost every theater of war. From its early days, Coastal Command has used Mosquitoes as a vital weapon against harbors, shipping, and vicious German U-boat packs. But by 1944, it has a bigger sting in its tail. Called the Tsetse Mosquito, this aircraft carries a Mullen 6-pound cannon with a kick like a mule.
Rate of fire was about 1 every 2 seconds. You could fire it separately, and that's an automated one every 2, or you fired it yourself, carrying 24 rounds. Very formidable weapon. It was armor piercing. You should have allowed yourself a range of 1,000, 1,500 yards for the target, but not to go closer than 600 yards. The reason why you shouldn't go in less than 600 yards is because you might get a bit of shrapnel for your own gun coming off the U-boat.
The aircraft also carries 8 60-pound rockets. When they unleash these terrifying weapons, it is equivalent to a broadside from a light naval cruiser. Once on target, nothing is safe from these fearsome Mosquitoes. It seems that there is nothing that the Mosquitoes are not called on to try. Always ingenious, the military are constantly planning different ways to use this unique wooden aircraft against the enemy. But what makes the Mosquito a legend are the daring low-altitude precision raids against the German Gestapo. It is as if the Mosquito crews had declared a personal war against the hated Nazi secret police. Since the early 1940s, the French resistance network has been a major thorn in the side of the German occupation. Its aim was to sabotage the Nazi war effort. By 1944, hundreds of these resistance fighters are imprisoned at the notorious Amiens prison in northern France. Word reaches the Allies that on February 19th, 200 French men and women would be executed. An ingenious plan is hatched. Mosquitoes will bomb the walls surrounding the prison so that the resistance fighters can escape. It is called Operation Jericho. The main prison layout is in the shape of a crucifix and surrounded by a 20-foot-high, 3-feet-thick wall topped with broken glass. Located at the end of a long road, the prison is surrounded by open, flat countryside. The timing of the raid is essential to its success. It must be midday when the prisoners are in the yard and the guards are having lunch. Equally important is precision. Great care has to be taken that enough explosive is used to smash a hole in the outside wall without destroying the prison and killing the inmates. When told of the danger, the resistance fighters reply they would rather die from RAF bombs than by a German firing squad. On the morning of February 18th, the Mosquito crews learn of their target.
We went into the briefing room around about 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning. And on the table was a mock-up model of the Havilland prison. And we were told we were going to try and breach the walls and give the prisoners a chance to escape.
The attack, timed for exactly noon, consists of 3 stages.
One squadron was briefed to breach the walls, in other words, to toss the bombs or fly very low level and put the bombs at the base of the walls, if possible. The second squadron were to come in at 12:02 when the guards had gone to lunch and bomb the dining hall, mess hall, anything they could lay their hands on to keep the guards under control. In case of the first squadron not breaching the walls completely, or the second squadron not doing the guards' quarters, etc., then the third squadron would bomb the whole prison.
As the crews wait for takeoff, it looks as if the raid might be called off. The weather has closed in, and all aircraft are grounded.
It was very, very bad weather, low cloud and spitting snow, you know what I mean? Very low cloud. And we didn't think it would go on.
What the Mosquito crews do not know is that the French resistance have sent a coded message: strike now or never, execution's imminent. At the last possible moment, with only 2 hours before the deadline, 18 Mosquitoes armed with 500-pound bombs take off in conditions worse than most of the crews have ever encountered.
We climbed through the cloud, and above the cloud we just joined up and went back down onto the sea level across to France.
Flying in 2 groups and at almost 0 feet, they sweep across the English Channel. Amazingly, as they approach the French coast, the weather improves. It seems that luck is on their side.
When we got to France, it was covered in snow, of course, but it was clear, and we flew around and we picked up the road from Havilland to Albert, long straight road, and we settled down for the run-in.
In the fields around the prison, French resistance fighters anxiously search the sky, waiting for the Mosquitoes to help their colleagues escape.
We could see the prison ahead. And we got down very, very low indeed, and we were coming down to around about 190, 180 knots.
With only minutes to go, and with the Germans completely unaware, the Mosquitoes approached the prison.
We opened their bomb doors about a mile from the prison, flying at about 10 to 15 feet. And we had to pull up, to go over the walls. We let our bombs go, and they went through the base of the wall. I turned to starboard, and as I looked down, I saw the startled face of the machine gunner in the little cupola on top of the prison. We looked at each other, I suppose, and then I was down onto the deck in loose formation following the wing commander.
The raid is a success, and the Mosquitoes have pulled off an amazing feat of courage. 255 prisoners escape, but 37 are killed in the attack, along with 50 German guards. The Gestapo retaliate. 260 prisoners are killed in reprisal. But the raid is a wake-up call to the Germans.
As far as I can see, this was a brilliant piece of precision bombing. The first flight took out the walls, blew in the doors, allowed people to escape. The second flight took the walls down. In fact, they didn't need the third flight. I think it was a startling success because it would have demonstrated to the Germans that the Royal Air Force could place bombs wherever they wanted to across occupied Europe.
The Mosquitoes continue to carry out their unique style of war against the Germans. They operated deep inside occupied Europe. Using technology that was years ahead of its time, they hunted down the Nazis. No one was out of their reach.
At the end of World War II, the Mosquito had the lowest loss rate of any aircraft in the Royal Air Force Bomber Command. Modern marvels will return in a moment.
Throughout the long and bloody conflict of World War II, the fast-flying wooden Mosquito was always at the front of battle, always taking the fight to the enemy. But it was the Americans that came up with yet another novel use for this versatile aircraft. Late in 1944, the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, a forerunner of the CIA, took over 5 Mosquitoes to work with their agents in occupied countries. Because the war was moving so rapidly, intelligence had a hard time knowing exactly what the enemy was doing. Only agents behind enemy lines could supply this information. It was vital that these agents get this information across enemy lines. Using Morse code was not an option, as the Germans can easily detect it. They needed something else. 2 American scientists had developed a transmitter that enabled an agent to talk to an aircraft. Called the Joan Eleanor system after one of the scientists' wives, it was an early version of the cell phone. By transmitting on a waveband so narrow, the Germans would have to be within 50 feet of the agent to detect him. But the ingenious part of this plan was the Mosquito. It could fly undetected along a predetermined 150-mile line, listening for the agent's message. Inside the Mosquito is an OSS operative.
Within the fuselage, there was hardly enough room to move, and I was sitting almost on top of a big fuel tank. The petrol in there would expand and would come out on a special valve, and I could see it down there bubbling, and that was petrol. When you switched on your suit, you always expected to spark, boom. But we were so high that there was very little oxygen in the air.
When the Mosquito reaches the area, the OSS operative can begin calling the agent.
This is 5278, 5278, calling Z313131, and then wait for him to say, yes, I'm here, and give me the answering code.
Sometimes, the Mosquito will fly along the designated route for hours on end before the agent answers.
When you heard them, it was exciting. It was, look, I've got him, finally. Confirmed who he was, and his short messages would be such and such a unit is there, and they're going west on highway number so-and-so, and it's 2 battalions or whatever it is, and and we could get it back in 3-4 hours.
But many times the agent never answers. Sometimes they cannot find a safe place to transmit from, and sometimes no one even knew the planes were there.
Well, when time was up, the pilot knew just how much petrol we had, we'd turn around, go back.
For a long time, the Mosquito had been the weapon of choice as a pathfinder for the bombers. But as a low-altitude marker, it was second to none in helping annihilate the German war machine in France. To enable precision bombing and reduce civilian casualties, the Mosquitoes flew with the squadrons of heavy bombers. As they reached their drop zone, the bombers dropped flares which illuminated the sky, and the Mosquitoes dove down to identify the individual targets.
So 4 of you were coming in, and the rule was that the first one who saw it called tally ho. Just that. You then positioned yourself and dived on one end of the target. And when you judged that you were at the right position above the ground, which was probably at about 1,000 feet, you were coming down at quite a speed after all, you pressed the button and away went 4 500-pound markers. And down they went, and made a great blob of red on the ground. You got the hell out of it.
Only when the target was ringed in red marker bombs did the leader call up to the oncoming bombers. But one of the most demanding roles the Mosquito took on was to cut off enemy supplies. It was a do-or-die mission in the days leading up to and after June 6, 1944, D-Day. As Allied troops fought a bloody battle to gain a foothold in France, the Mosquitoes hunt independently, seeking out enemy supply lines.
Trains we preferred to attack because they were always carrying war material on it, or reinforcements for the front. Sometimes you could attack a train going into a tunnel, and you'd get the other end of the tunnel and wait for it and shoot it up as it came out. It was fun, really, shooting up trains.
During the month of June, Bomber Command flew over 15,000 raids and supported the Allied invasion forces. And by the end of 1944, they had helped drive the Germans back into their own country. Finally, on May 2nd, 1945, 2 days after Hitler's suicide in Berlin, 126 Mosquitoes took part in the last raid of the war in Europe, their target, the German port of Kiel. Within 2 hours, the city was reduced to rubble, a grim legacy to the destructive power of the wooden wonder. The aircraft that was initially greeted with scorn proved to be no joke. It was one of the most feared and lethal killers of World War II. Over 7,700 were built, and over 40 different versions had served in all theaters of World War II. To the men who had flown it, the Mosquito was second to none.
It was a love affair, and I thought, well, when I finished flying, that was it. I never flew another aircraft again after the Mosquito. Never.
It's wrong, really, to say it was a legend, because the legend suggests it wasn't real, and the Mosquito was certainly reality. But it was a lovely aircraft, beautiful aircraft to look at, marvellous aircraft to fly.
Well, in many cases saved my life, but I mean, I think the Wooden Wonder, it's been used before, but I think the Wooden Wonder really sums it up. It was.